Let's get down to business. Vagueness.
Imposter.
To locate where we are going through a process. And the process we're going through is understanding that all textual analysis has got three components to it. You begin by getting the structure clear, then you work on the analysis, and then you figure out what's changed. And just depending on the text that you're working with, these applications of structure, power questioning, and paradigm shift will be differentiated. So when you're learning a Mishnah, the parts and the whole, finding the structure is a very simple process compared to the Gemara, because the Mishnah essentially really only has two components in general: a case with a ruling. Sometimes there's a reasoning, but the type of things the Mishnah does is very different and very limited as compared to the Gemara. The Gemara has got these five primary elements of debate, which means the Gemara is a much more complex flow. And it's a flow. It's a suggestion, it's a rejection, it's a proof, it's a counter-proof. So because of the added complexity of the flow of the Gemara, we need to be a little bit more on our game when we squatterizing. And the reason why it's squatters, that's an easy way to remember the seven primary elements of debate. Those are the seven parts that any Gemara will inevitably consist of. There's only these seven parts. There's nothing more in the Gemara than these seven parts, which means when confronted by the sea of words and it seems overwhelming, how in the world am I going to be able to find clarity amidst this chaos? When you have these seven words to guide you: name it, tame it, name it, tame it, name it, tame it. So generally speaking, every sugya will begin with a statement, and then it may go into any one of these other six. Very often the Gemara will question, find a difficulty with the statement. It may ask an information question as to where the origin of the statement comes from. Then characteristically, if it asks the question, it will provide an answer. If it asks a kasha, it will give a teretz, a resolution, and then it will be either proven or disproven, or there will be no need to bring a proof because it's self-standing. Sometimes there will be a stira, quite a rare movement in the Gemara stira, which is a putting together two equally weighted sources and recognizing how they conflict. And that's all the things that could happen in the Gemara. So when you go underneath the input phase, which is a structure phase, which is squatters, you have to number and label the parts. And we learned yesterday a small little Gemara, which we said comprised of 5 parts. I'm going to go over that Gemara again now, and then we're going to progress. And once you've done that, and now the structure is clear, and you understand what the parts are, and it's no longer a sea of words, but articulated parts, then you can begin the power questioning of 353, premise shift, etc. Are you ready for that? Yes? 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 Well, then let's do it. Let's go to the Gemara. The Gemara can be found on this page, Chav Zayin Amud Beis, and it's right at the top of the page, Uvo Acher, the last word on the top of the Gemara, Uvo Acher, and came another. Uvo Acher, and came another. V'niskal bo, and he tripped over it. V'shavra, and he broke it. Patur, he's exempt. Part 1 of the sugya is this statement, which is a quotation from our Mishnah. The Mishnah says, if someone left a jug in the public domain and someone else came and tripped over, stumbled over it and broke it, the person that broke it is exempt. Part number 1. Part number 2, the Gemara says, Anai, part 2, screams out, why is he exempt? He should look and then go. He should look where he's going. You as a pedestrian, the onus of making sure you don't stumble is upon you. And if the onus of not stumbling is upon you, why in the world are you exempt? You should be liable for the damages that you have caused If you can just pass it over to Yakir. Thank you very much. Welcome, Yakir. Good morning. Nice to have you here. So, my part, why is he exempt? You're walking in the public domain. Just like as we said yesterday, when you're driving a car, a road is a public domain. You have to be careful that you don't crash into the car in front of you. Maybe they'll stop suddenly. Make sure that there's enough room between you and them so that they don't. Similarly, when you're walking in a public domain, make sure that your eyes are fixed on the ground in case there would be an obstacle, that you can be aware of it and not trample on it like an unwanted snail, Teddy. Yes. Hearing the crunch. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of squashing a snail. I've never done it, I don't think consciously, but then there have been times when I've heard a crunch and I've looked back and there's a puddle of snail behind me. Retroactively disturbing. So you have to look where you're going. You have to look where you're going. You're always going to look where you're going. And if so, why? Why are you exempt? Good. Part 2 of the Gemara. Statement. Raising a difficulty with a statement, simultaneously teaching me, Tom, not to take things lying down as you tend to do. Given information, you just gobble it up, accept it. A little bit like a sheep, just following blindly. Joke. So that So that's what the Gemara does. It doesn't take it lying down. It questions. What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean you're exempt? You should be liable. What do you mean? What do you mean? Teaching us. You know what Rabbi Volozhiner says, Teddy? He says that in the Mishnah in Perek Avos, it says, your base vad l'chachamim. Your house should be a meeting place for the sages. V'haveh misavek beragleihem. And you should something in their feet. And there's a lot of dispute as to what the translation of avek is. Very often it's translated from the word avak, which means dust. You should be in the dust of their feet. And drink thirstily their words. Thirstily their words, because what? Thirst is to water, questions are to wisdom. In other words, question their words and therefore you'll have the thirst. But that expression, avek beragleihem, this is how Rabbi Volozhiner explains. He says, you make your house a meeting place for the sages. How do you do that? Sages aren't easy to invite over. I've tried. They say, I'm not coming to Segal. You're joking. I've got better things to do. He says that have books, have svarim in your house. Learn them. Have a misavek. And then have a misavek. Wrestle with them. Litavek means to wrestle. Don't take them lying down. Yakir, you know what he says? He says it is forbidden for a student to accept something from his teacher without questioning it. If you don't understand, question it. Have a misavek. Same time, from a position of humility. But afar agleim, you're in the dust of their feet. And that's the beauty of a question, which is coming from a place of searching for knowledge as a place from dismissal, a place of humility or a place of arrogance. Sometimes people say, no, you can't say that. And they ask a question. But the point of the question is not to learn, but to unlearn, to dismiss. When you're humble, then you ask, you misavek, you ask the questions. You want to know, you want to understand. But you also recognize your relative limitations to those that came before you. And that's exactly what this Gemara is doing right now to the Mishnah. What are you talking about? No. Part 2, kasha. Part 3 is a resolution. Resolution number 1. Part 3. Amri devei Rav, said the school of Rav. So Rav was a great sage. He was one of the sages, one of the Amoraim that was in the twilight zone between Amoraim and Tanoim, between the teachers and the explainers. Rav, he was a student of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who compiled the Mishnah. So Rav has an incredible authority, and he started a yeshiva. That's called Devei Rav. Devei Rav was his own yeshiva. And so the people who learned in yeshiva, they had a teaching that he had given when he taught in the yeshiva. Amri Devei Rav, said the school of Rav, Mishmei Rav, in the name of Rav. This Mishnah contrary to what you may have assumed, is b'mamale reshus harabim. It's when it is filled up, the public domain, kula, in its entirety, b'chaviyos, with barrels. You're right, says Rav. When you questioned the Mishnah and you said, when a person walks upon the street, he should look where he's going, you're absolutely right. In the normative case, that is correct. In broad daylight and a single jug, you should see it, avoid it, and not break it. And were you to break it, you would be liable. In other words, the Mishnah is not telling me, Yakir, the rule. The Mishnah is telling me the exception. The rule is when you're walking in the public domain and you break something, you're liable. And you stumble over it, you're liable. You should have looked where you're going. Our Mishnah is talking about a exceptional case. Over here, some inconsiderate loaf had filled up the entire thoroughfare with barrels. And therefore, when you're negotiating your way between them and you stumble and fall and break one of them, you're not liable, because the truth is, he there was openly and belligerently negligent to block people's thoroughfare, and therefore there in that case, when there's no way of avoiding them, then you're exempt. But in the generic case, you'll be liable. Now, I want to use this opportunity to reiterate the most common and profound movements that the Gemara uses in its process of analysis. It's called, as we may have said before, LOL, which we all know stands for logic overrides language. So now look at this. If you look at the language of the Mishnah, it says a person placed a jug in the public domain, someone stumbled over it and broke it, he's exempt. The language, the simple understanding of the text seems to suggest any jug in any public domain you'll be liable for. Comes along the Gemara and does, in this particular kind of logic overrides language, is called nukimta. It shrinks down what appears to be a generic case to a very, very specific one. Based on the constraints of logic, it says the Mishnah cannot mean what it suggests. We have to limit it to a particular situation in order to make sense of it, because logic overrides language. And the hand movements and sound effects for nukimta go like this. Whenever you say nukimta yakir, you raise your hands from either side, making sure you've got a wide girth, and then you start to bring them closer towards one another, ever closer, ever closer, ever closer. When you get to approximately a 30-second distance between right and left hand, you start the sound effects, and this is how the sound effects sound like. That's called nukimta. You take a broad general thing and you limit it to a very little specific situation. What compels you to do this? You have a license. What's the license to take a broad case and limit it to specific questions which show me that logically this makes no sense, and therefore I'm compelled to say, it says this, but it means that. Logic overrides language, always logic overrides language. Your eyes, the wise man's eyes are in his head. Part 3 of the Gemara. Statement, difficulty, resolution. And the resolution involves the compromising of the simple reading to a forced reading for the sake of logic. Resolution number 1. Resolution number 2. Shmuel says, in darkness it was taught. Shmuel takes the same tack as the school of Rav, and he says, I also agree that even though it's spoken generally, it's very specific, but I argue, and I'm not quite sure, I'm going to leave it open for the moment, either I argue or I offer an alternative without arguing. You could also say the Mishnah is talking about at night, when it's dark. And when it's dark, you can't see where you're going. And when you can't see where you're going, you can't look ahead of you. And therefore, that's why you exempt a question from Yakira coming from this other room, looking good, looking brave, looking alert.
So are these rabbis specifically disagreeing with the Mishnah, or are they saying this is what the Mishnah like secretly meant, but it didn't write it for whatever reason?
Exactly the latter. This is what the Mishnah secretly meant, and it didn't write it, because the nature of the Mishnah, it was written in a deliberately cryptic way to have the discussions that exactly the Gemara is having right now, to maintain the flavor and the nature of the oral tradition.
Wouldn't it just be easier to just like give explicit answers and like call it dead?
No.
You don't think?
Firstly, you don't think. Secondly, those answers would then become a written statement which doesn't allow for the expansion and understanding. It doesn't empower you to investigate what is actually underneath it, what's underneath it. And at that point in time, they could become frozen to specific scenarios. Rather, we're trying to create an elasticity that allows you to perceive the idea from all different aspects, which will then give you the power to apply it to new and different situations as you progress throughout geography and history. You have to think about it, that Torah is designed for all times and all places. So therefore, you have to be very, very fastidious about deriving the correct extrapolations from the text. And you have to be good at seeing something and thinking, I don't know what that means. And I have to understand the meaning, because the meaning is where the meaning of the meaning, the principle underneath the text, that's going to be the light that shines on new situations and scenarios. Okay, so we've got Devei Rav, Mishmei Rav, and he says it's talking about where it's jam-packed with barrels. That's part 3 of the Gemara. Part 4 of the Gemara is a second answer, second resolution. Shmuel Amar Ba'afedishon, it's dark. And the third answer is Rabbi Yochanan Amar B'Keren Zavis. Rabbi Yochanan says it's around the corner, and therefore when you're walking, your eyes were ahead of you, you turned the corner, was placed exactly as you turned the corner. You had no anticipation they would be there, and therefore breaking it is inadvertent. And those are the 3 cases where you'll be exempt. But in any other case, you'll be liable. Now, to address Tom's problem, well, not his problem, but his question. His problem require a lot more time. And so Tom's problem was, well, why, once you say these 3 examples, let's say 20 examples, or let's limit it to 1 example, just get the point across. I'll ask you another question which leads into answering your question. Are these 3 examples, example number 1, this is what the Mishnah is talking about. The road is blockaded. Example number 2, this is what the Mishnah is talking about. It's dark. Example number 3, this is what the Mishnah is talking about. It's around the corner. Are they complementary or contradictory? Meaning, if you went up to Rav and you say, Rav, you set up the Mishnah in a situation where it's blockaded. What would you say if the person broke it in the middle of the night? Would he be liable or would he be exempt? You'd go to Rabbi Yochanan. You say to him, Rabbi Yochanan, you said it's talking about around the corner. What would you say if a person broke it at night? And we could start to argue as to maybe these are different expressions of degrees of negligence. So for example, just as a suggestion, Binyamin, but I'm not going to say that this is final, as a suggestion, you could argue that when you blockade the thoroughfare with barrels, it's unavoidable. There's nothing you can do. You have to walk past. You have the right of way. And therefore, if you inadvertently break it, that's forgivable. But anything less than that, you'll be liable for. Meaning you're walking at dark, okay, take a lantern so you can see the way ahead of you. You're turning a corner, look before you turn. There's measures you can take to make sure you don't break anything. And therefore Rav would say, I take an extreme opinion. And the only time you're exempt is when it's blockaded. Shmuel will say, Rav, obviously I agree to you, but I add that it's not only when it's blockaded. At night, when you can't see where you're going, and there's nothing you can do other than introducing a foreign object, namely a torch. There's nothing you can do to see your way. It's a failure means that it's, let's say, we have to understand also what a failure means. Does a failure mean pitch black? Or does a failure mean impaired visibility? And there'd be a difference between how dark is the night. In ancient world, when there was new moon, the night was pitch black. You couldn't see anything. When it was full moon, there was a high range of visibility. When you said dark, did he mean dark like full moon or dark like no moon? We have to explore. But let's say that Shmuel goes one step further and he says, I agree with you, Rav, that when it's blockaded, there's no avoiding it, and therefore you're exempt. But you know what? Even when it's dark, and let's take the most extreme example, when it's pitch black, and Afela will understand to mean pitch black, because he doesn't say choshech, he doesn't say balayla, he doesn't say at night, he doesn't say in the darkness, he says Afela, meaning pitch black. When it's pitch black, then you're also exempt, because we don't expect you to walk around with a torch to make sure where you're going in order to find things on the ground. And Rabbi Yochanan says, I agree to you, Rav, I agree to you, Shmuel, but I think it's even more than that. Even when you turn a corner, Shmuel says, when you turn a corner, just peek around the corner and see. Rabbi Yochanan says, that's not an expectation that we have of you. Provided that it's not in your line of vision, any other kind of obstruction placed in your way, you're going to be held responsible for. And therefore would be three different levels, principles of levels of negligence. And then you could say, well, therefore we don't have to keep on suggesting more and more principles, because essentially this is probably the spectrum that we want to work within. So that's a suggested answer. In order for us to make sense of the Mishnah, we have to override. Logic overrides language. Logic overrides language, 100%.
If it was light, there wouldn't be a conversation.
Wouldn't be a conversation. So therefore, we override. We override. You feel the overriding, Binyamin. You feel the overriding, Moshe. This is what Gemara does the whole time. This is what we do the whole time. What we see is not what it is. What it is what it is. We're right now in the middle of a war. Why? Do we actually know the reason? Not clear. Why is Trump attacking Iran? We don't know. Is it about the Chinese and the Russians? Is it about the oil supply? Is it about the allegiance to Israel? We have no idea. We can see the words and hear the words that he says, but we still don't know what is actually going on. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to develop not sight, but insight. Go inside. And what's underneath the surface. The Gemara is tutoring us. It's mediating to us. When you're given a piece of information, don't just gobble it up, question it. And if it's logically inconsistent, you have to say that even though the words say this, they mean that. Question from David.
So wouldn't you also be able to strengthen the cases in how fast you're actually going as well? Because it might take a certain amount of time. If you're running, for instance,
right,
then you're exempt from it because...
Quite wrong. Absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong. But a brilliant factor. What about the speed at which you're walking? This is amazing. You're saying, well, Matt, what do you mean? Even if it's in broad daylight and I'm running and I can't stop myself, well, then it's not my problem. Yes, it is. Because the Gemara says you're not allowed to run in the public domain. That is an act of negligence. Running in the public domain is a negligent act. There's stuff around, there's people around, you're going to bump into someone. Can't run in a public domain. The marathon, how are you going to train? Sort it out. Yes, Zechariah. But one second, Yakira's had a question before you, Zechariah. You run all over the place. Yes, I know. And that's exactly why I brought this up right now. Because I know you, and they've spoken to me from the municipality. They call you the running hazard. Just yesterday, 6 old people complained that you floored them literally as you went past. And they said, we don't care about your time in the marathon. You have to be a little bit more considerate. So obviously it means it depends on the density of people around you. Meaning if it's an open road and you occasionally, have a passerby, that's not a problem. But think about it. Go for a run. Have you ever run through the main street in the shuk? The answer is no, because you're going to knock someone over. Okay, so you with me? Good. Okay. So until now, all I've done is a kind of a recapture of what we spoke about yesterday, which is the structure of the Gemara. There are 5 parts of the Gemara, and we've added a little bit of depth and nuance, but essentially there's a statement which is then raised a difficulty, doesn't make any sense, and 3 resolutions. I'd like to just continue with what we're trying to do, which was have a methodology of approach. Before, legitimately, our field of interest was expanded by the questioning, which was wonderful. But I want to stay focused, Zachary, if you don't mind. I want to stay focused. I want us all to stay focused, Zachariah, if you don't mind. Good? What we just did now, essentially, was to number and label the parts. We did other stuff as well, but we numbered and labeled the parts. That was our primary goal. We then got into a discussion which allowed a lot of understanding to occur, but we didn't do it systematically. How would you do that same discussion systematically? This is how it works. There was a kasha. In a kasha, you have to know who's in the crosshairs of the kasha and what is the premise of the kasha. So let's replay the kasha. The kasha was the Gemara asking on the Mishnah. Who was in the crosshairs? Who was the Gemara asking on? The Tana of the Mishnah. If you would, in your own words, Tom, imagine I would be the Tana of the Mishnah, and you're asking me the kasha. I'm going to say my bit, and then you're going to ask me the kasha. I want you to invest the full emotional range that you can muster up in the kasha and embody the upset that you feel about the din. Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay, so, hi. Mishnah says that, representing the Tana of our Mishnah, and he says that when a person places a jug in the public domain and someone else comes and they stumble over and they break it, the person who breaks it, exempt, clean, no responsibility to pay for the damage of the shattered jug. How do you feel about that? What?
Why? Why is he exempt? Where is the logic in that?
Tell me what your issue is.
Well, for him to be exempt, logically, there are missing parameters here because we should have a responsibility to see where we're going and not stumble over someone else's property.
Oh, what you're suggesting is people should look where they're going, and therefore if this guy didn't look where he was going and he stumbled, he's the guilty party and not the person who placed it?
That's 100% what I'm suggesting.
Wow.
Full confidence.
Wow. Beautiful. Okay? So what happens, did you feel when you own it, you owned the kasha. You felt this kasha was on someone. Very often people read the Gemara and they say, oh, it's a kasha. It's not ever a kasha. It's a kasha on someone. So imagine that person standing in front of you. You have a problem with him. Generally, when you have a problem with a person, you don't say, oh, I've got this problem with you. You know why? No. You feel this is a problem. It captivates you. It moves you. That's called crosshairs. You're shooting at me. You're saying, Tana, you make no sense. This is crazy. What are you doing? Okay? Number 2, premise. Crosshairs premise. Now, in order for you to ask that kasha, you're thinking something and you're seeing something. You're thinking a theory and you're seeing a scene. Good? What is the scene that you're seeing when the Mishnah says that he placed it in the public domain? What does the scene look like? Remember when we did the illustration, what does the scene look like? When you ask your kasha, how are you interpreting the scene in the Mishnah?
Someone came and desperately needed to put something down because
Day or night?
they had something else to do.
Good.
So they put it down.
What time of day was it, or night?
So at this point, it's still light out.
It's light, in the middle of the day. How many jugs were there? One single jug. In other words, the way you see the case is a single jug in broad daylight in the middle of the road. Okay? And that's what you see. Your theory is people need to look where they're going. In order for me to resolve this problem, I can do one of two things. I can change the theory or I can change the scene. Correct? Our Gemara changes what? The theory or the scene? The scene. It retains the theory. Yes, you do have to look where you're going. but it's blockaded, but it's dark, but it's around the corner. And the way it resolves a problem is maintaining your logical standpoint to the way you understood the case, but you saw it wrong. Okay? Alternatively, I would say maybe we could do the opposite. Maybe we could change the way you think and maintain the scene. What do I mean by that? Come with me to see more diversity, beauty, and expand your brain just that much more. If you look at the Gemara and you go down, Amar le Rabbi Abba le Rav Ashi. Says Rabbi Abba to Rav Ashi. Amar le, says Rabbi Abba le Rav Ashi. Haki Amri b'Marava. This is what they said in the West. The West is because the Talmud was, this part of the Gemara was written in Babylon, which is Iran, Iraq. What is west of Iran and Iraq? Israel. What's west? I'm going to bring a map for Tom. What's west of Babylon is Israel, and this is what they say in the West. Mishmei de Rabbi Ula, in the name of Rabbi Ula. This is how they reconciled the problem of the Mishnah in the West. Lefi, because she'ein darkan, it is not the way shel bnei adam, of people, lihitbonein b'derachim, to look where they're going. And we said you could either shift the scenario or the reasoning. The first three approaches in the Gemara hold on to the reasoning and change the case. The last approach in the Gemara holds on to the case and changes the reasoning. And therefore we have two schools of thought. One school of thought that says you don't have to look where you're going, and therefore this can be talking about broad daylight. The other schools of thought that say you have to look where you're going, but it's around the corner, it's blockaded, it's dark.
It's a night.
It's a night.
Sure.
So now we have the full spectrum of understanding, whether it be theoretical or practical, in how to resolve this mysterious Mishnah. Isn't that great? Okay, so that is called premise shift. The premise was how you see it. There's two components, the theory and the scene, and the shift can either shift the scene or shift the theory. In the first three answers, we shifted the scene. In the last answer, we shifted the theory. So that's the classic example of how we applied power questioning, which is the analysis, to the Gemara. The analysis. You start off with the premise, and there's two components, the crosshairs, who it's aiming at, premise, and then what's the shift. So since we only have kashas and turrets in our Gemara, we as of yet don't have an opportunity to demonstrate in the text what would a question be and what would an answer be, how would a proof work, and how would a contradiction work. We've got more to learn.